Step out of the vehicle and keep those hands where I can see them." Officer Kane Ryder's hand drifted to his belt, fingers resting close enough to make the point. He leaned into the window with the easy confidence of a man who had never once been wrong in his own mind. Calder Thorne stepped out onto the sidewalk. His hands stayed visible, and his face stayed still, while Ryder circled him, the way he had circled him years earlier. "You look familiar. Can't place it, though," Ryder said, almost amused. Calder looked at him steadily. "You still don't remember me, oh, do you?" What Officer Kane Ryder didn't know was that the man standing in front of him had spent the last decade becoming a nightmare for corrupt men. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because the next story is one you cannot miss. The azaleas were blooming on Millbrook Avenue, pink and white, pretty as a postcard, the kind of flowers that made people slow their cars and smile. Calder Thorne didn't smile. He sat behind the wheel of his black government SUV and stared at the small brick house across the street, and he felt the weight of years pressing down on his chest like a stone. He had grown up 2 neighborhoods over. He knew these streets the way he knew his own hands. The cracked sidewalk in front of Mrs. Cole's house, the oak tree on the corner that had survived storms, the way the morning light came through the Spanish moss and turned everything gold for a while before the Georgia heat burned it away. He knew this street, and this street had almost destroyed him. Calder shifted in his seat. The engine was off. The windows were up. He had been sitting there for a while, watching the front door of his mother's house and telling himself he was just getting his bearings. That was what he told himself. But the truth was simpler and harder than that. He needed a moment. Just one moment to be Calder Thorne, the son, before he had to be Special Agent Calder Thorne of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. His radio crackled. "You sure you don't want me pulling up?" Selene Vargas's voice came through, steady and calm. She was parked a couple of blocks away. She always knew when to hang back. "I'm sure," Calder said. "You've been sitting there for a while. I know how long I've been sitting here, Selene." A pause. "Okay." She knew when to let things go, too. That was why they worked. Calder looked at the front door of his mother's house. Hattie Thorne had lived in that house for a long time. She had raised Calder in a 2-bedroom apartment on the other side of town, and when she finally bought that little brick house on Millbrook Avenue, she had painted every single room herself. Pale yellow kitchen, sky blue bathroom. She was so proud of those walls. Weeks earlier, she had called him crying. Not scared crying. Angry crying. The kind that comes after you've held yourself together so long that one more thing finally breaks the dam. She had been walking back from her neighbor's house, middle of the afternoon, broad daylight, when a police cruiser slowed beside her. The officer inside leaned out the window and told her she looked suspicious, told her she should watch herself, said it with a smile that made it worse, not better. Calder had asked her the officer's name. She had said, Kane Ryder, and something in Calder had gone very, very quiet. He was reaching for his phone to check in with Selene again when he saw it. The black and white cruiser rolled around the far corner of Millbrook Avenue, slow and deliberate, like it owned the road and everything on it. Calder watched it in his rearview mirror. It wasn't rushing. It wasn't responding to anything. It was just moving through the neighborhood the way a hawk moves over an open field. It slowed. Calder kept his hands loose in his lap. It stopped, right behind his SUV. He watched the driver's door swing open. He watched the man step out. He knew, before the man even turned around, who it was. Something about the way he moved, unhurried, unbothered, like a man who had never once in his life been told he was wrong. Confirmed it before Calder even saw his face. Kane Ryder was built like a man who had never stopped being proud of it. thick through the shoulders, square jaw, a little more gray at his temples than in the old photographs, but the same flat eyes, the same set to his mouth. His right hand rested near his belt as he walked, not on his weapon, just close to it. Just enough to make a point without saying a word. He walked toward the SUV like he had all the time in the world, like this street belonged to him, like every person on it answered to him. Calder watched him come. He didn't move, didn't tense, didn't reach for anything. He just breathed steady and let the stone in his chest settle. And he thought about his mother's voice on the phone weeks earlier. And he thought about the morning years earlier on this sickhead street. And he thought about everything that had happened since, and everything that was about to happen now. Kane Ryder raised one knuckle and rapped on the driver's side window. Calder looked at him through the glass. Then he rolled it down. Ryder leaned against the doorframe like he was settling in for a long conversation. He looked Calder over slowly. Top to bottom. The way you look at something you're deciding whether or not to bother with. His eyes moved across the interior of the SUV, the government plates, the radio console, the badge clip on Calder's belt, and then came back up to Calder's face. Help you with something? Calder said. That's funny. Ryder smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. I was about to ask you the same thing. He straightened up and crossed his arms over his chest. Got a call about a suspicious vehicle sitting on this block. Just doing my job. Calder looked at him. I'm visiting family. That right? Ryder glanced at the house across the street, then back at Calder. Funny place to visit family, sitting in your car with the engine off for... He made a show of checking his watch. Going on a while now? Is there a law against that? Ryder's smile thinned. Why don't you step out of the vehicle for me? It wasn't a question. It was never a question with men like Ryder. The words were polite enough, but the meaning underneath was something else entirely. I said move, and you will move because I said so. Calder opened the door slowly. He stepped out with both hands in plain view, fingers spread, the way he had learned to do a long time ago. Not because he was afraid, but because he was smart. And there was a difference. He stood on the sidewalk and kept his body still and his face even. Across the street, a screen door opened. Mrs. Cole stepped onto her porch, coffee cup in hand. She stopped when she saw them. Her hand moved slowly to her chest. She didn't go back inside. Ryder circled slightly, putting himself between Calder and the SUV, and studied his face again. Something moved behind his eyes. A flicker. The kind of look a man gets when something is almost familiar, but won't quite come into focus. You know, Ryder said, you look familiar to me. Is that so? Calder said. Yeah. Ryder tilted his head. Can't place it, though. He said it casually, like it was just conversation, like they were two men. Chatting at a gas station. Go ahead and produce some ID for me. Calder reached toward his jacket, slowly, deliberately. Every movement announced before it happened. Every inch of space accounted for. Because that was what you did when a man like Kane Ryder was watching you with his hand resting close to his weapon. His fingers had just touched the inside of his jacket when Ryder's hand dropped. Not to his weapon. Just closer. Just enough. Just that quiet, terrible language that didn't need words. Mrs. Cole hadn't moved. Calder pulled out his credentials, the badge and the ID card, official and unmistakable. The kind of thing that did not leave room for misunderstanding. He held it up at eye level, steady as a wall, and he let Ryder read every single word on it. Federal Bureau of Investigation, Special Agent. The silence that followed lasted only a few seconds. In those seconds, Ryder's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowed. He read it again. Then he straightened up, and something shifted in his face. The condescension didn't leave, but something else moved in behind it. Something calculated. He reached for his radio. Dispatch, this is Ryder. I've got a subject on Millbrook Avenue presenting what appears to be federal credentials. Possible impersonation situation. Subject is acting erratically. Request backup." Calder looked at him. "Erratically? You heard me. I've been standing here with my hands visible since I stepped out of the vehicle. Sir, I'm going to need you to stay calm." And there it was. The flip. The oldest trick in the book. Make the calm man seem dangerous. Make the dangerous man seem reasonable. Rewrite the story before anyone else could write it first. Calder looked over Ryder's shoulder. Mrs. Cole was still on her porch. 2 more neighbors had appeared at the edge of their driveways now, drawn by the cruiser's lights. Phones were out. Ryder had an audience. So did Calder. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out his phone, and made a call. 2 sentences. He gave his location and a single name. Then he put the phone back in his pocket and looked at Kane Ryder. "I'd put that radio away," Calder said quietly. And then he waited. Celine Vargas moved fast when she needed to. Her black SUV came around the corner of Millbrook Avenue a short while after Calder's call, and she was out of the vehicle before it had fully stopped. Badge out, phone to her ear. Her voice was level and professional and absolutely unmovable. "Yes, this is Special Agent Celine Vargas, FBI Civil Rights Division. I need your dispatch supervisor on the line right now. You have an officer on Millbrook Avenue who just filed a false impersonation report against a credentialed federal agent." A pause. She listened. "I'll hold 30 seconds. After that, I'm calling your chief directly." Ryder watched her. The easy confidence in his posture had developed a crack in it. Small, but visible. The dispatch supervisor came on. Celine gave him Calder's badge number, his credentials, his Washington field office contact. She gave him all of it, calmly and clearly, standing on a public sidewalk in the Georgia morning sun, while neighbors watched from driveways and porches, and the cameras on their phones kept rolling. It took only a short time. The impersonation call was retracted. Ryder unclipped his radio and said something quiet into it. His eyes stayed flat, but the color in his neck had gone up. He clipped the radio back slowly, like a man who was working very hard on appearing unbothered. Calder had not moved. He stood exactly where he had been standing, hands at his sides, and he looked at Kane Ryder the way you look at something you have been waiting a long time to face. Not with anger, something steadier than anger. Something that had been sitting in a quiet room inside him for years, patient as a stone. "We done here?" Ryder said. His voice had a new edge to it, harder, like a man who had just lost a small fight and was already thinking about the next one. "Not quite," Calder said. He took one step closer. Not aggressive, not threatening, just closing the distance enough so that what he was about to say would land the way it needed to land. "My name is Special Agent Calder Thorne, Civil Rights Division, Federal Bureau of Investigation." He let that sit for exactly 1 second. "Years ago, you arrested me on this exact street for a crime I did not commit." Something moved across Ryder's face. Calder watched it happen. He saw the moment the memory surfaced. Not like a man drowning in guilt, not like someone who had lost sleep over it, but like a man flipping through a filing cabinet in his head and finding a folder he thought had been permanently closed. A young black teacher, a traffic stop on Millbrook Avenue, drugs that appeared in a vehicle search, days in county lockup before the charge collapsed, a formal complaint that went absolutely nowhere. He remembered it the way you remember a Tuesday. That was the part that hit the hardest. "I don't know what you're talking about," Ryder said. "Yes, you do," Calder said. "You just did the math." The two men looked at each other. Around them, the street was completely silent. Mrs. Cole had not moved from her porch. Celine stood to Calder's left, watching, saying nothing. A mockingbird called once from the oak tree on the corner, and then went quiet. Like even it understood the weight of the moment. "You still don't remember me, do you?" Calder said it softly. It was not a question. It was something worse than a question. It was an observation, a verdict. The statement of a man who had already known the answer before he asked it, and was saying it out loud, not for himself, but for everyone else on that sidewalk. Ryder's jaw tightened. His eyes moved once to Celine, once to the neighbors, once to the phone still pointed in his direction. He was doing the calculation. All the exits, all the angles. He found none that helped him. "We're done here," he said. He walked back to his cruiser without another word. Got in. The door closed with a hard, final sound. The engine turned over. The black and white rolled slowly down Millbrook Avenue and turned the corner and disappeared. Calder stood on the sidewalk and watched it go. Then he turned and looked at his mother's brick house across the street, the pale yellow curtains in the kitchen window, the flower boxes she had planted herself, still blooming after all these years. Then he looked back at the empty corner where the cruiser had been. His jaw was tight. This was never going to be enough. After Ryder's cruiser disappeared around the corner, Mrs. Cole came down off her porch. She moved slowly, but with purpose. Arms crossed over her house dress, eyes sharp behind her bifocals. She had lived on Millbrook Avenue for a long time. She had known Hattie Thorne almost as long. She had watched Calder grow up from a skinny kid on a bicycle into whatever it was standing in front of her right now. She looked at his badge, then at his face. "You Hattie's boy," she said. Not a question. "Yes, ma'am." She studied him a moment longer. Then she reached into her house dress pocket and produced a small piece of paper, already folded like she had been carrying it there, waiting for exactly this moment. "There's a man at Greater Hope Baptist who's been writing down everything Ryder does for years." She pressed the paper into Calder's hand. Every name, every date, all of it. Nobody ever listened to him before. She glanced down the empty street where the cruiser had been. Maybe now somebody will. Calder unfolded it. A name and a phone number written in careful cursive. Reverend Otis Grant. "He knows your mama," Mrs. Cole said. "Tell him Dorothy sent you. He'll meet you tonight." May's diner sat on the east edge of the black neighborhood, like it had been there since the beginning of time. Old wood floors, ceiling fans that wobbled slightly on every rotation, the smell of coffee and cornbread baked into the walls. By evening, on a weeknight, the dinner crowd had thinned to a few regulars, nursing pie slices, and the occasional table of churchwomen who stayed late talking. Calder and Celine took the corner booth in the back. Reverend Otis Grant arrived a short while later. Older, short and compact, with white hair cut close, and hands that had the careful, deliberate quality of a man who had spent decades choosing his words and his movements with equal precision. He was wearing a gray sweater despite the warm evening. Under his arm, he carried a leather journal, dark brown and swollen with use, its spine cracked from being opened thousands of times. He slid into the booth across from them and set the journal on the table between them without saying hello first. "Dorothy said you'd come." He looked at Calder steadily. "I've been waiting years for someone like you to walk through that door. I stopped practicing my opening speech about 2 years ago." Celine poured him a cup of coffee from the carafe on the table. He wrapped both hands around it. "Thank you for meeting us, Reverend," Calder said. "Don't thank me yet." Grant tapped the journal with 2 fingers. "Thank me after you've read this." He slid it across the table. Calder opened it carefully. The first page was dated years earlier, written in small, precise handwriting. Grant had documented everything. Dates, times, badge numbers, names of residents who had been stopped, questioned, harassed. He had written down what people told him in his office after Sunday service, at his kitchen table, on his front porch late at night, when they had nowhere else to go and no one else to tell. 17 incidents, all of them bearing the same name, all of them following the same pattern. A black man pulled over for no clear reason. A black woman told to move along from her own front yard. A teenager thrown against a fence and searched while his friends watched. Families who filed complaints and heard nothing back. A man named Gerald Summers, who spent days in county jail before his wife found a lawyer willing to make a phone call. Calder read slowly. Celine photographed every page with her phone, steady and systematic, not missing a single line. People were afraid to go on record, Grant said. You have to understand that. These are people who have lived here their whole lives. They know what happens when you speak up, and nothing comes of it. They know what it costs. I understand, Calder said. He did. There's a name near the back, Grant said. Page 43. Calder turned to it. Silas Quinn. Young at the time of his arrest. No prior record. Worked nights at a warehouse on the county line. Arrested on Ryder's stop for possession with intent to distribute. The charge carried a long sentence. Silas maintained from the first day that he had never seen the drugs before in his life. His public defender worked dozens of cases that month. The trial lasted 2 days. He was currently in year 9 of his sentence. Calder closed the journal and sat back. The ceiling fan wobbled overhead. Somewhere near the front of the diner, a man laughed at something on the television above the counter. His sister comes to my church, Grant said quietly. Lila. She's been fighting for years. Letters to the governor. Letters to the state attorney. She's exhausted. He paused. She never stopped. But she's exhausted. Celine's phone rang. She looked at the screen, held up one finger and stepped outside. Calder looked at the journal. He looked at the name on page 43. Silas Quinn had gone to prison the same year Calder had stood on a sidewalk on Millbrook Avenue and had his life nearly taken apart by the same man. Calder got out after a couple of days because he had a principal who made phone calls and a clean record and enough resources to survive the machinery long enough for it to spit him back out. Silas had none of that. The diner hummed quietly around them. Celine came back in through the glass door. She stood at the edge of the booth and looked at Calder with an expression he recognized immediately. Not alarm. Something more serious than alarm. The look of someone who has just found a thread that unravels everything. You need to hear this, she said. Celine's news was too big for a diner booth. She looked at Reverend Grant, then back at Calder. We need to go, she said. Just that. Grant read the room the way old men who have survived a long time learn to read rooms. He nodded, finished his coffee, and slid out of the booth without asking questions. Calder tucked the journal under his arm. Their field office was a single room above Henderson's Hardware, 2 blocks from Millbrook Avenue. They had rented it under a business name, paid cash for the first month, and kept the blinds drawn. It smelled like sawdust from the store below and old coffee from the pot they had set up on the folding table by the window. Calder pulled the door shut behind them. Celine was already at her laptop. Talk to me, Calder said. She turned the screen toward him. The Federal Intelligence Unit in Washington had been building a financial case for months. It had started as a routine audit of Meridian Correctional Solutions, a private prison contractor operating across 3 counties in southern Georgia. Meridian ran 2 facilities and had contracts with 4 county governments. On paper, they were a detention management company. Clean website, professional brochure, the kind of business that nobody thought twice about. But the money told a different story. Celine pulled up the first document. Meridian's contracts with the county governments included performance incentives, she said. Occupancy bonuses. Every bed they filled above a certain threshold, they collected extra money. Calder looked at the screen. So they needed bodies. They needed bodies, Celine confirmed. And they needed a reliable pipeline to fill them. She clicked to the next document. A shell company called Southeastern Logistics Consulting. No real office. No real employees. A post office box in Augusta. Money flowed from Meridian into Southeastern Logistics, and from there into 4 separate accounts. Celine pointed at the first account name. Kane Ryder. Calder sat down slowly. He's not just a dirty cop, Celine said. He's the architect. He ran the operation across 3 counties. He coordinated with 2 other officers, names are in the file, and a county commissioner who made sure the contract stayed in place and the complaints went nowhere. Every arrest was deliberate. Every planted bag, every manufactured stop. She paused. They were filling quotas, Calder, like a factory. The room was very quiet. Calder looked at the financial records spread across the screen. Numbers and account names and dates. All of it dry and factual and devastating. Somewhere behind all those numbers were human beings. Fathers, sons, men who had gone to bed one night with their whole lives in front of them and woken up the next morning in a cell. How many? He said. 11 confirmed wrongful convictions so far. The financial records only go back several years. The operation could be older. Celine closed the laptop halfway. Silas Quinn is on the list. So are 10 other people. Calder thought about what Grant had said at the diner. She's been fighting for years. She never stopped. But she's exhausted. He thought about his own couple of days in county lockup. The smell of it. The cold metal bench. The feeling of the walls coming in. A couple of days, and it had taken him years to fully shake it. He'd had his principal calling around. He'd had his record. He'd had enough to fight back with. A couple of days had nearly broken him. Silas Quinn had been in there for years. There's more. Tim said. He looked at her. The county commissioner who's connected to the shell company. He sits on the oversight board that reviews police misconduct complaints. She let that land. Every complaint filed against Ryder in recent years went to that board. Calder leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling. The naked bulb hanging from the cord. The crack in the plaster running from the light fixture to the far wall. A machine. That was what it was. Not one bad cop having a bad day. A machine built deliberately, running quietly for years, fed by money, and protected by the very system that was supposed to stop it. He had come to Harlan Falls because of his mother, because of what Ryder had done to her on a quiet afternoon, because of what Ryder had done to him years earlier on a sidewalk 2 blocks from here. But this was so much bigger than that. He reached across this table and picked up Grant's journal. He opened it to page 43. Silas Quinn, Year 9. We're not leaving Harlan Falls, Calder said quietly, until every name in that file goes home. The following Sunday morning, Greater Hope Baptist Church was full. Calder and Celine slipped into a pew near the back before the service started. Nobody made a fuss about them being there. A few people glanced over, recognized Calder as Hattie Thorne's son, gave small nods, and turned back to their programs. That was enough for now. Reverend Grant preached about patience that morning, about how justice delayed was not always justice denied. about how the people who kept records and kept faith and kept showing up were the ones who eventually changed things. He never looked directly at Calder during the sermon. He didn't need to. After the service, people gathered in the fellowship hall for coffee and food. Calder didn't work the room, didn't introduce himself as FBI or flash credentials, or make anyone feel like they were being interviewed. He just stood near the coffee table and let people come to him at their own pace. A few did. Over the days that followed, he and Celine met with 9 families. Not in the field office, in living rooms and on front porches and at kitchen tables with the television turned low in the background. Celine kept her notebook in her lap and wrote carefully and never interrupted. Calder listened. He was good at listening. It was the skill nobody taught you in the academy, but it was the most important one he had. He heard about a man named Curtis Webman, who had been stopped multiple times in recent months on the same road going to and from work. About a woman named Patricia Mason, who called the department to report a break-in and ended up being questioned herself for a long stretch. About a teenager named Sean Carter, who had been shoved against a chain-link fence and searched while his little brother watched from a bicycle across the street. All of them had filed complaints. All of them had heard nothing back. Some of them cried. Some of them were past crying and sat dry-eyed and steady and spoke in the flat, matter-of-fact voice of people who had learned to keep their pain at a manageable distance just to get through the day. Calder recognized that voice. He had used it himself. Every evening he stopped at Hattie's house on his way back to the field office. He ate whatever she had made even when he wasn't hungry. He fixed a loose hinge on her back door. He sat with her on the porch in the cooling evening air and let her talk about her garden and her church friends and her stories about the neighborhood. And he didn't bring up the case because she didn't need to carry that. She had already carried enough. On the 5th day, Celine located Lila Quinn. She lived a short drive from Millbrook Avenue in a small yellow house with a chain-link fence and 2 potted plants on the front step that were barely hanging on. Calder went alone. Celine waited in the car. Lila answered the door on the second knock. Tired in the way that goes all the way down to the bone. The kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix anymore. She looked at Calder's badge without surprise, without hope either. "I've talked to a lot of people," she said. She didn't invite him in right away. "I know," Calder said. "I read about some of them in a journal." Something shifted slightly in her eyes. She stepped back from the door. They sat at her kitchen table. Lila kept her hands folded in front of her and answered his questions carefully and without emotion, like she was reading from a document she had memorized. Years of fighting for her brother had taught her not to feel too much in front of people who might not stay. Calder didn't make promises. He didn't tell her everything was going to be fine, or that this time would be different. He just listened and asked careful questions and let her tell it at her own pace. She told him about Silas, about the night he was arrested, about the things he said in his first phone call from county lockup, scared and confused and saying over and over that he didn't know where those drugs came from, about how she had believed him without hesitation because she knew her brother. When she finished talking, the kitchen was quiet. Lila looked at Calder for a long moment, measuring him the way people measure someone they want to trust, but have been burned too many times to trust easily. Then she reached into the kitchen drawer behind her and produced a folded piece of paper. "Before you come back here," she said, "you need to talk to this man first. He tried to file a federal complaint years ago." She set the paper on the table between them, and somebody made it disappear. The name on Lila's paper was Bernard Hale. Calder called the number that same evening, sitting in the field office with the windows dark, and Celine across the table eating takeout she hadn't touched in a while. The phone rang several times before a man answered, cautious, voice low and measured, the way people answer calls from numbers they don't recognize, and aren't sure they should have picked up. "Mr. Hale," Calder said. "My name is Special Agent Calder Thorne. Lila Quinn gave me your number." A long pause. "I wondered when someone would call," Hale said finally. "Took long enough." Bernard Hale lived in a tan brick ranch house in a quiet neighborhood outside Savannah, a good drive from Harlan Falls. Calder made the drive alone the next morning, leaving Selene at the field office to continue processing the financial documents. The highway stretched flat and straight through pine forests and farmland, and Calder drove with the radio off and thought about what Lila had said. Somebody made it disappear. Hale answered the door before Calder knocked. He had been watching from the window. Retired FBI. Years of service. He was a broad man, gone slightly soft in retirement, wearing a plaid shirt with the sleeves rolled up. His eyes were sharp and careful, and carried the permanent alertness of someone who had spent decades in rooms where people lied to him. He shook Calder's hand and led him to the kitchen table without small talk. "You want coffee?" "Please," Calder said. Hale poured 2 cups and sat down. He looked at Calder steadily. "You're really FBI?" "Civil Rights Division." Hale nodded slowly. "Then, you need to hear all of it." Years earlier, Lila Quinn had filed a federal civil rights complaint regarding her brother's arrest and conviction. The complaint was routed to the FBI's regional field office in Macon. It landed on Bernard Hale's desk. "I read it the same day it came in," Hale said. He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. "And I knew within an hour it was credible. The inconsistencies in the arrest report alone were enough to open a preliminary inquiry. The timeline didn't hold together. The chain of evidence had gaps. And the officer named in the complaint," he paused, "had 2 prior misconduct allegations that had been closed without investigation." "Ryder," Calder said. "Ryder," Hale confirmed. Hale had begun building the preliminary file. He had pulled Ryder's arrest record going back years. He had requested the evidence logs from the county. He had been preparing to escalate the case upward when his supervisor called him into the office and told him to close it. "Just like that?" Calder said. "Just like that." Hale's voice was flat. "Insufficient grounds for federal involvement. That was the official reason. I pushed back. My supervisor told me the matter had been reviewed at a higher level and a determination had been made." He looked at Calder. "I had been doing that job for years. I knew what it sounded like when someone with a phone and a favor was pulling strings. Did you get a name?" "No, but I kept my notes." He stood up and left the room. Came back a couple of minutes later with a manila folder, worn at the edges, held shut with a rubber band that had faded from black to gray. He set it on the table. Calder opened it carefully. Inside were Hale's handwritten notes, his preliminary file summary, and a single internal memo from his supervisor directing him to close the complaint. The memo was vague and formal, and said almost nothing, which itself said everything. "Months after I closed it," Hale said, "I was transferred to an administrative position. I retired some time later." He sat back down. "I kept those notes because I knew one day someone would need them." Calder looked at the memo, then at Hale. "The pressure came from inside the regional office." "That's my belief, yes." The implications settled over the kitchen like a change in weather. The corruption wasn't just local. It had a reach inside the FBI's own structure. Someone inside the regional office had protected Ryder years earlier. That same someone could be watching now. Calder closed the folder. His voice was steady. "I need to take these. That's why I kept them," Hale said simply. Driving back to Harlan Falls, Calder called Selene. 4 words. "We go dark. Regional office is compromised. Everything goes through Washington only." He hung up and drove through the pine forests with the folder on the passenger seat beside him, and the full weight of what they were up against sitting quietly in the car with him. Calder arrived at Hattie's house in the morning. He did this every day now. It was part routine and part something he couldn't fully name. A need to see her standing in her kitchen moving between the stove and the counter, the pale yellow walls around her, the smell of coffee already made. It steadied him. In the middle of everything that was moving fast and getting complicated, his mother's kitchen was the one fixed point. He parked in front of the house and noticed immediately that something was wrong. The front door was open behind the screen. That wasn't unusual. Hattie opened it in the mornings to let the air through, but she wasn't on the porch the way she sometimes was, watering her flower boxes or watching the street. The house had a stillness to it that made the back of his neck tighten. He was up the porch steps in a few strides. She was sitting at the kitchen table, not eating, not with her coffee, just sitting, both hands flat on the surface in front of her, staring at a piece of paper like it was something that had crawled in under the door. Her eyes were red. "Mama," she looked up at him. She was not a woman who cried easily. Years of hard work and harder circumstances had built something in Hattie Thorne that bent without breaking over and over again. Calder had seen her cry only a few times in his adult life. This was close to another. She slid the paper across the table without speaking. It was an official county code violation notice dated recently, citing a cracked section of the rear foundation and an improperly maintained drainage easement along the back property line. It was written in dense official language, full of reference numbers and compliance deadlines. At the bottom, in bold print, it stated that failure to respond within a certain period could result in fines and further action. Calder read it twice. Then he set it down and looked at his mother. "I've lived in this house for years," Hattie said. Her voice was quiet and controlled, and underneath the control was something burning. "I have never had a code violation. Not one. I painted every room in this house myself. I fixed the gutters myself. I planted those flowers myself." She looked at the paper. "Years, and now suddenly there's a problem with my foundation?" Calder knew exactly what this was. Ryder had gone on offense. He didn't know the full scope of what Calder was building. Didn't know about Washington, or the financial warrants, or Bernard Hale's folder. But he knew something was moving against him. Men like Ryder had instincts for that. And when men like Ryder felt threatened, they didn't wait. They reached for the nearest weapon. Hattie Potter was the nearest weapon. "He did this," Hattie said. It wasn't a question. She already knew. "He did this," Calder said. She looked at him. "Through the county? He has a contact there. We already know that." He kept his voice level. Even. He was the agent right now, and he could not afford to stop being the agent. Not even in his mother's kitchen with her red eyes looking at him across the table. But something was moving in his chest that had nothing to do with the case. She had painted every room in this house herself. "I want you to leave it alone," Calder said. "Don't call the county. Don't respond to anything. Don't let it stress you. Don't let it stress me." She almost laughed. "I'm going to handle it." Calder. She said his name the way she had said it his whole life when she needed him to stop talking and start listening. "I am not afraid of Kane Ryder. I want you to know that. I'm not sitting here scared." She put her hand flat on the table. "I'm sitting here angry. There's a difference." "I know the difference, Mama." "Then go handle it." He stood. He kissed the top of her head. He walked back through the house and out the front door and down the porch steps to his car. He sat behind the wheel. He allowed himself a short stretch of time. He pressed both hands flat against his thighs and let the rage move through him like a current, hot and electric and entirely justified. He closed his eyes, breathed through it, let it settle. Then he picked up his phone and called Celine. His voice was completely calm. Add the code violation to the file. County inspector. Date of notice. Connection to Ryder's retaliation pattern. We document everything. He started the engine and pulled away from the curb. Chief Harlan Crow had a particular way of sitting behind his desk. Leaned back, hands folded across his stomach. The posture of a man who believed the desk itself was a kind of weapon. A declaration of territory, of rank, of the distance between himself and whoever was sitting across from him. He had been behind that desk for years. He had survived multiple mayors, city council overhauls, and numerous misconduct complaints. He was very good at surviving things. Vivian Cross sat across from him with a legal pad on her knee and her pen uncapped. I need a wall, Crow said. Built fast and built solid. He slid a folder across the desk. Cross opened it. Inside was a collection of documents, incident reports, duty logs, a 2-page summary that described Special Agent Calder Thorne as a federal employee conducting unauthorized surveillance of Harlan Falls police officers as part of a personal vendetta stemming from a decade-old grievance. Cross read carefully. She turned pages slowly. He's credentialed? She said. Doesn't matter. Credentialed agents don't get to run personal vendettas on city time. Crow leaned forward. What matters is the narrative. He had a bad experience here years ago. He came back with a badge and a grudge. That's the story. I need you to build the legal framework around it. Cross looked at a specific line in the summary. Then she looked up. Were there witnesses to the initial encounter on Millbrook Avenue? Neighbors, civilians. Crow waved a hand. Irrelevant. Cross made a note. She did not say what she was thinking. She had learned a long time ago that this office rewarded silence and punished questions. She capped her pen, closed the folder, and told Crow she would review everything and come back to him. She left with the folder under her arm and an uncomfortable feeling she couldn't quite name sitting at the base of her throat. Calder and Celine had anticipated the pushback. The local federal judge, a man named Holloway, who had been photographed with Crow at the county charity golf tournament for years running, was not a viable option for their warrant application. Calder had flagged that early. Instead, they drove the package to a federal magistrate in Atlanta, a woman named Judge Patricia Sims, who had a reputation for reading everything twice and approving nothing she wasn't completely satisfied with. She read it twice. After days of careful review, she signed it. Days was a long time. Calder knew it. Every morning during those days, he drove past the East Side neighborhoods and thought about the 11 names in the financial file, and thought about Silas Quinn in year 9 of his sentence. Every afternoon, he and Celine refined the case documents and verified the financial trail one more time and made sure there was not a single gap that a defense attorney could crawl through. And every evening he stopped at Hattie's house and sat on the porch and did not tell her how close they were. On one of those evenings, his phone rang late. It was Reverend Grant. His voice was steady, but something underneath it was not. Someone threw a rock through my window, he said. The church window, front left. Come when you can. Calder was there in minutes. The rock was still on the floor inside, surrounded by broken glass that caught the light from the street lamp outside and glittered like something almost beautiful. It was a large rock, the kind you pick up deliberately, the kind that is chosen, not grabbed. A piece of paper was rubber-banded around it, blank on both sides. The message didn't need words. Grant was sitting in the third pew from the front, still in his house clothes, hands on his knees, looking at the broken window with an expression that was not fear and was not defeat, but was somewhere in the territory between exhaustion and resolve. Calder sat down beside him. He did not take notes, did not photograph the scene immediately, did not do any of the things the agent in him would normally do first. He just sat down in the pew next to an older man who had been writing in a leather journal alone for years because it was the only thing he could think of to do. And he stayed there in the quiet, broken church. After a long time, Grant said, "I've been writing in that journal for years. I just needed someone to come." Calder looked at the broken window, the night air moving through it. "I came," he said. The warrant arrived from Atlanta on a morning. Calder was already at the field office when Celine's email notification chimed. He watched her open it, read it, and then leaned back in her chair with her eyes closed for a few seconds. Not relief. Something quieter than relief. The particular feeling of a door finally opening that you have been pushing against for a long time. "We have it," she said. They spent the entire day on the financial records, everything laid out across the folding tables, printed documents organized in rows, the digital files open on both laptops cross-referenced against the physical copies. They went through it all one final time: the shell company, the Meridian payments, the 4 connected accounts, the 11 wrongful convictions mapped against the arrest dates and the corresponding deposits. Every piece in its place, every link in the chain verified and documented. The case was airtight. Calder transmitted the full package to his Washington supervisor through the secure channel that afternoon. Senior Supervisory Agent Marcus Hale, years in the Bureau, the kind of man who did not use exclamation points in his emails and whose approval meant something real. The response came back later. Package received and reviewed. Federal arrest warrants approved. Operation authorized. Execute at your discretion. Recommend a short window for team coordination. Hale. Calder read it twice. Then he set his phone face down on the table and sat very still for a moment. Celine looked at him across the table. "You okay?" "Yeah," he said. He picked up his phone again. "Let's set it for Saturday morning." They spent the next stretch of time coordinating with Washington on team placement. 4 locations would be hit simultaneously: Ryder's home, the police department, Chief Crow's home, and the Meridian Regional Office. 4 federal teams, timed to the minute, no phone calls to local law enforcement, no courtesy notifications, nothing that could travel sideways through the wrong set of ears. When the coordination was done, Calder closed his laptop and looked around the small room above the hardware store. The sawdust smell, the cracked plaster ceiling, the folding tables covered in documents that added up to years of Silas Quinn's life. And 11 other lives, and a machine that had been running quietly in the dark. A short window. He drove to Hattie's house. She had made smothered pork chops and rice and string beans with the little pieces of ham in them, the way she had made them his entire life. The kitchen smelled like it had always smelled, and the pale yellow walls were exactly as they had always been. And Hattie moved between the stove and the counter with the same unhurried competence, brought to everything. Calder sat at the kitchen table and ate without his phone in his hand, which was something he had not done in days. "You look different," Hattie said. She sat across from him. Different how? She studied his face. Like something got lighter. He looked at his plate. He thought about what he could tell her and what he couldn't. He chose his words carefully. "It's almost over, Mama. I can't tell you more than that. But it's almost over." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached across the table and put her hand over his once, briefly, the way she had done when he was small and frightened, and she needed him to know without words that things were going to be all right. She stood up and turned the television on in the living room, an old program she liked. She brought him a second helping without asking if he wanted it. They watched the evening news together on the couch, a story about a local school fundraiser, weather coming in from the coast. Hattie commented on the weatherman's tie. Calder laughed at something for the first time in a while, and it felt strange and good in equal measure. Later, he kissed her forehead and drove back to the field office. He was asleep on the cot in the back room not long after. The first real sleep he had allowed himself in days. His phone rang late. "Celine," he answered on the second ring. Her voice was flat in the specific way that meant something had gone badly wrong. "The operation is blown. Meridian's legal team identified the financial inquiry. They made calls. 3 of our named officers have already lawyered up." A pause. "Crow is calling a press conference for the morning. Calder, he's going to get ahead of this. He's going to frame you as the story." The room was dark and very quiet. "I'm on my way," Calder said. The field office felt smaller at midnight. Calder sat at the folding table with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled up and the full weight of the collapsed operation pressing down on everything in the room. Celine sat across from him. Between them were the laptops, the printed documents, Bernard Hale's folder, and Grant's journal. All of it still there. All of it still true. None of it currently enough. "Talk me through it," Calder said. "All of it." Celine pulled up the timeline on her laptop. Meridian Correctional Solutions had a legal team out of Atlanta. Attorneys on retainer experienced in federal contract defense. When the financial inquiry flagged their shell company accounts, the alert went to their lead attorney within hours. That attorney made 2 calls. The first was to the county commissioner connected to the scheme. The second, and this was the one that mattered, went to a mid-level supervisor inside the FBI's regional field office in Macon. A man named Reginald Langford. Same man, almost certainly, who had pressured Bernard Hale years earlier. Langford had moved up since then, gotten comfortable. And comfortable men with something to protect moved fast when they felt the ground shift. "Langford tipped the officers," Celine said. "Not directly, through the commissioner, but the result is the same. 3 of them have attorneys now, and they're not talking." She closed the laptop. "And Crow gets in front of a camera in a few hours and makes you the villain." Calder looked at the table. At all the pieces laid out across it, the press narrative Crow had prepared, with Vivian Cross's reluctant assistance, framed everything neatly. A black FBI agent with a documented personal grievance returning to his hometown and using federal authority to harass local officers. It was a lie built around just enough truth to be dangerous. And in a few hours, it would be on every local news channel in the state. There was more. Lila had called earlier. Someone had gotten to a corrections official through the county commissioner's office. Silas Quinn's clemency hearing scheduled for the following month had been postponed indefinitely on a procedural technicality. One phone call from the right person to the right desk, and years of Lila's fighting had been pushed back into the dark. Celine said quietly, "What do we do?" Calder didn't answer right away. He sat with the question. Let it settle. He looked at the journal on the table. Dark brown, cracked spine. Years of a man's faithful documentation sitting in a room above a hardware store in the middle of the night. He reached over and picked it up. He had read it carefully. He had photographed every page. But in the rush of building the financial case, he had moved quickly through the back sections. He opened it now and turned past page 43, past Lila's name, past the list of complaint dates. Near the back, tucked into the inside rear cover, were several photocopied pages in Grant's handwriting. Careful, deliberate. The Reverend had copied these by hand, and then copied them again on a copy machine somewhere, preserving them twice. Calder read the first line. Then he sat up straight. It was a letter written by Silas Quinn, years earlier, from his cell at Macon State Correctional Facility. Written in the slow, deliberate hand of a man who had never written anything more important in his life, and knew it. It described in specific and unflinching detail The night of his arrest. The traffic stop. Ryder's demeanor. The moment Ryder told him to step out of the vehicle and then move to the passenger side door while his partner stood at the rear of the car, blocking the view from the street. The bag had come from Ryder's jacket. Silas wrote it plainly, without drama. He put it there. I watched him do it. I said I had never seen it before. And he looked at me and smiled. And then the part that made Calder's chest go still. The lies Ryder told at booking. Specific phrases, specific details. Matched the official police report word for word. The report was written before Silas had spoken a single sentence on the record. It had been scripted. Start to finish. This was not just evidence. This was a first-hand sworn account from inside the machine, written by the man it had swallowed, preserved by a reverend who believed that the truth deserved to be kept, even when nobody was ready to hear it. Calder looked at Celine. She had been reading over his shoulder. He picked up his phone and called Lila Quinn late at night. She answered on the second ring. "Lila," he said, "the letter Silas wrote years ago. Does he still have the original?" A long silence. "I'll call him tonight," she said. Lila called back early the next morning. Calder was already awake. He hadn't gone back to sleep after midnight. He had sat at the folding table with Grant's journal and Hale's folder and a legal pad where he had been writing and crossing out and rewriting the next steps until the page was covered in ink. Celine was asleep on the cot in the back room. The first gray light of morning was just beginning to show at the edges of the window blinds. His phone lit up. He answered before the first ring finished. "He has it," Lila said. Her voice was thick. She had been crying, or she had just stopped crying, or she was right at the edge of it. He kept it with his personal documents the whole time. Years he's been in there, and he kept that letter. Calder closed his eyes for 1 second. "Lila," he said, "we're going to need to get it out through his attorney today. Can you make that happen?" "I'll make it happen," she said. No hesitation. Years of fighting had made her fast. He thanked her and hung up. He sat for a moment in the quiet of the early morning. Outside, Harlan Falls was just beginning to wake up. A truck moved somewhere on the street below. A bird started up in the oak tree a couple of blocks over. In a few hours, Crow would be standing in front of cameras, trying to burn to everything Calder had built. He picked up his legal pad and looked at the name he had written at the bottom of the page, encircled twice. Vivian Cross. Celine was up by morning. Calder told her about Lila's call while she poured coffee. Then he told her what he was going to do next. She looked at him over her cup. "You sure about Cross?" "No," he said. "But I'm sure about what she's been handed, and what it'll cost her if she signs off on it." He had pulled Cross's background weeks earlier as part of the standard case preparation. Years as city attorney, clean record, competent, careful, the kind of lawyer who read everything before she signed it. But there was something else in the file. Years earlier, Cross's daughter, home from college for the summer, had been pulled over by a Harlan Falls officer on a Friday night. The stop had escalated in ways the official report described vaguely and incompletely. The family had retained a private attorney. A settlement was reached. The file was sealed. Cross had not filed a complaint. She had not made noise. She had taken the settlement and gone quiet and gone back to her office and kept doing her job. Calder understood that kind of quiet. It wasn't cowardice. It was the calculated survival of a person who understood exactly what the machine around her was capable of and had decided that protecting her daughter from further exposure was worth more than the fight. But she had never forgotten. He dialed her number early. She answered on the third ring. Alert, already awake. He could hear papers in the background. "Ms. Cross," he said, "this is Special Agent Calder Thorne. I think you know why I'm calling." A pause. Not a surprised pause, a considering one. "I wondered if you would." "I want to tell you what's actually in the federal file," Calder said. "Not what Chief Crow told you is in it. What's actually there. And I want you to hear it before the press conference this morning, because after that, your name is going to be permanently attached to whatever happens next." He talked for a focused stretch of time. He told her about Meridian and the shell company and the 11 wrongful convictions. He told her about Bernard Hale and the buried complaint, and Reginald Langford inside the regional office. He told her about Silas Quinn's letter. He told her about Hattie's code violation. He did not mention her daughter. Not once. Not even close. When he finished, the line was quiet for a moment. "I'm not threatening you," Calder said. "I'm not leveraging anything. I'm giving you one question to sit with." He kept his voice even and clear. "Do you want to be on the right side of this?" Another silence. Longer this time. "Where are you?" she said. "Above Henderson's Hardware, 2 blocks from Millbrook Avenue. I'll be there in an hour." Vivian Cross arrived a short while later. She walked through the door of the field office carrying the press package Crow had given her, a set of her own case files, and a written statement she had already prepared before she made the drive over. She set everything on the folding table and looked at Calder across it. "Tell me what you need," she said. At exactly the planned hour that morning, 4 federal teams moved. Calder had coordinated the timing himself, down to the minute. 4 locations, 4 simultaneous hits. No courtesy calls to local law enforcement. No notifications to the regional field office. Nothing moving through any channel that Reginald Langford, or the county commissioner, or Meridian's attorneys could intercept. The operation ran clean and dark and hit all 4 points at the same moment, like 4 fingers of the same fist closing at once. Calder heard the confirmations come through his earpiece one after another as he drove. Team 1, Police Department confirmed. Team 2, Chief Crow's residence, confirmed. Team 3, Meridian Correctional Solutions Regional Office, confirmed. He turned onto the cul-de-sac. Ryder Street was quiet that morning. Brick ranch houses set back from the road. Neat lawns. A basketball hoop at the end of the block, with the net half gone. An American flag hanging still in the windless morning air from the porch of the 3rd house on the right. Calder pulled up slow and parked at the curb. He sat for exactly a few seconds. Then he got out. 4 federal agents fell into position behind him, without a word. 2 flanking left, 2 right. Moving with the quiet efficiency of people who had done this many times and understood that the way you approached the door said everything about who held the power in what was about to happen. Calder walked up the front path. He had thought about this moment more than he had admitted to Celine or to himself. Not obsessively, not with the kind of heat that clouds judgment, but in the quiet moments, driving between locations, sitting on his mother's porch in the evening. He had thought about what it would feel like to stand on this man's doorstep with a warrant in his hand. He knocked. 3 solid knocks, official, unmistakable. Seconds passed. The door opened. Kane Ryder stood in the frame in a gray bathrobe, hair uncombed, coffee cup in his hand. He looked at Calder first with the blank confusion of a man who hasn't fully woken up yet. Then his eyes focused, sharpened, moved from Calder's face to the 4 agents on his porch, to the federal vehicles at his curb. The coffee cup lowered slowly. Something moved through Ryder's face. Not fear exactly, but the sudden visceral understanding of a man who has spent years believing himself untouchable and is feeling that belief crack for the very first time. His jaw tightened. His eyes went hard. And underneath it all, beneath the defiance that was his first instinct and his oldest habit, something else flickered. He recognized Calder completely now. Not the way he had almost recognized him on Millbrook Avenue. Vaguely, filing cabinet recognition. This was full and total and unavoidable. The teacher from years earlier was standing on his porch in the morning light, with a federal warrant in one hand and the entire weight of the United States government behind him. Calder looked at him steadily. Kane Ryder. His voice was professional, clear. The voice of an agent who had done the work and followed the law and stood now exactly where the law had put him. You are under arrest for federal racketeering, civil rights violations, conspiracy, and evidence tampering. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. He let the words finish and settle. Then a pause, deliberate and unhurried. The kind of pause that belongs entirely to the man who holds the warrant. I'd recommend you use it, Calder said quietly. The agents moved forward. Ryder didn't resist. The bathrobe, the coffee cup, the comfortable Saturday morning ease of a man who had slept well for years. All of it ended on his own front porch, in his own quiet cul-de-sac, while his neighbors came out of their houses one by one and stood at the edges of their driveways and watched. As the agents walked Ryder to the federal vehicle, Calder stood on the front path and watched them go. He didn't feel what he had expected to feel. Not triumph, not the hot satisfaction of revenge. Something quieter, heavier and cleaner at the same time. He thought about a leather journal, about a woman named Lila who had been fighting for years, about 11 names in a financial file, about Silas Quinn in year 9 of a sentence built from a lie. He thought about his mother sitting at her kitchen table with a violation notice in her shaking hands. He turned and walked back to his vehicle. 2 miles away, the press that had gathered for Crow's press conference was filming something else entirely. By midday, the footage was everywhere. Kane Ryder in handcuffs on his own front porch. Chief Harlan Crow being walked out of his brick colonial in his dress shirt, hands behind his back, while 2 federal agents held the door. The press that had assembled outside the Harlan Falls Police Department for Crow's press conference had instead stood on the sidewalk and filmed federal agents carrying boxes of evidence through the front door. The story rewrote itself in real time. Calder and Celine spent the morning at the field office managing the aftermath with Washington. Marcus Hale called mid-morning. Calm and precise, the way he always was. He told Calder that Reginald Langford, the compromised regional supervisor, had submitted his resignation a short while after the warrants executed. Calder said nothing to that. Hale said charges would follow within the week. Calder said that was good. Later, Celine took a call from the team at the Meridian Correctional Solutions Regional Office. The executive director, a man named Paul Seaton, had not been at his desk when the team arrived. A check with the county airport confirmed he had attempted to board a morning flight to Houston. The flight had been delayed for a mechanical issue. Those minutes were enough. Federal agents met Seaton at the gate with a warrant and walked him back through the terminal, while passengers with rolling suitcases moved around them in both directions. Seaton said nothing. His attorney was on the phone before they reached the exit, Celine told Calder. He nodded once and went back to the documents. Vivienne Cross issued her public statement that afternoon. She stood in front of the City Hall steps without notes and read from a prepared statement in a steady voice. She acknowledged that the Harlan Falls Police Department had engaged in a pattern of systematic civil rights violations over a period of not less than several years. She acknowledged that misconduct complaints had been improperly routed through an oversight board, compromised by financial conflicts of interest. She acknowledged She acknowledged that the city's legal office had been asked to construct a false narrative to protect officers under federal investigation. She did not read that last part, without her voice tightening slightly. It was the first time in the history of Harlan Falls that any city official had stood in public and said any of it out loud. Reverend Grant watched it on the television in the fellowship hall of Greater Hope Baptist. He sat alone in a folding chair with his hands on his knees and watched Vivian Cross read every word. When it was over, he sat quietly for a long time. Then he reached under his chair and picked up a new leather journal he had bought that morning at the pharmacy a couple of blocks over. He opened it to the first page. He didn't write anything yet. He just looked at the blank page. The 11 wrongful conviction cases were flagged for emergency judicial review the same afternoon the warrants executed. Federal public defenders were assigned. The process moved with the particular urgency that federal pressure produces in systems that would otherwise take months. It took days for Silas Quinn. Calder drove to Macon State Correctional Facility on a gray morning. Celine rode with him. They didn't talk much on the drive. The pine forests moved past the windows, and the sky was low and white, and the road was straight and long. Lila was already in the parking lot when they arrived. She was standing beside her car with her mother, a small woman in a church coat despite the overcast sky, and Reverend Grant, who had driven down alone and arrived early. They waited. The door opened. Silas Quinn walked out in civilian clothes that Lila had brought and left at the facility the day before. He was older now, and he walked slowly, not from weakness, but from the particular careful way of a man relearning that the space around him was open and does not end at a wall. He saw Lila first. She crossed the parking lot, and they held each other without words for a long time. Then he looked up. His eyes found Calder standing quietly at the edge of the group. He looked at him for a long moment, taking in the face, understanding without being told exactly who this was and what it had taken. He walked over. Calder stepped forward and shook his hand with both of his own. Silas's voice was low. "You came back." "I came back," Calder said. Hattie Thorne received the official written notice days later. Code violation dismissed. Case closed. The county inspector who had filed it was under investigation for misconduct connected to the broader federal case. She folded the notice in half and put it in the kitchen drawer and never looked at it again. Calder loaded the last bag into the black SUV early one morning. The street was quiet. The hardware store below the field office wasn't open yet. The folding tables were bare, the laptops packed, the printed documents boxed and logged and on their way to Washington. The room above Henderson's hardware looked exactly as it had when they rented it. Just a room with a cracked ceiling and a coffee pot and windows that let in the morning light at a particular angle that Calder had gotten used to without noticing. He took one last look at it from the doorway. Then he pulled the door shut and went downstairs. Celine was parked on the street with her engine running. She rolled down her window when she saw him. "I'll see you back in Atlanta," she said. "Drive safe." She looked at him for a moment. Selena Vargas was not a sentimental person by nature, and neither was Calder, which was part of why they worked. But she held his gaze for just a beat longer than usual. "You did good, Calder," she said simply. She rolled the window up and pulled away from the curb. Calder watched her go. Then he got in his own SUV and drove the 2 blocks to Millbrook Avenue. Hattie was already in the kitchen. He could smell the coffee from the front porch. The door was open behind the screen the way it always was in the mornings, and the pale yellow walls of the kitchen caught the early light and held it the way they always had. Warm and steady, unchanged by everything that had happened in the weeks around them. Calder let himself in. Hattie turned from the counter and looked at him the way she had been looking at him since he was small. That particular maternal assessment that took in everything at once and needed no explanation. She saw his bag. She saw his keys. She turned back to the counter and poured 2 cups of coffee without saying anything. They sat at the kitchen table. The same table where she had sat with the violation notice in her shaking hands. The same chairs. The same window with the pale yellow curtains moving slightly in the morning air. But the table was clear now. Nothing on it but 2 cups of coffee and the morning light lying flat and clean across the surface. They didn't talk about Ryder. Didn't talk about the case or the warrants or the press coverage that had run for days. They didn't talk about Silas Quinn walking out of a parking lot in Macon, or Vivian Cross on the City Hall steps, or Bernard Hale in Savannah, who had kept a folder for years on faith alone. They just sat together in the kitchen that Hattie Thorne had painted herself years earlier and drank their coffee while Harlan Falls woke up slowly outside the window. "You eat?" Hattie said. "I'm okay." "That's not what I asked." He almost smiled. "No, ma'am." She stood up and moved to the stove. While she cooked, Calder sat at the table and looked at the kitchen walls. Pale yellow. He had never asked her why she chose that color. He made a note to ask her the next time. He wanted to know. His phone buzzed on the table. Celine's name. A text message. Not a call. He picked it up and read it. "Washington wants to talk about next steps. Meridian operates in 6 states. Hale wants us in Monday." Calder set the phone face down on the table. Hattie set a plate in front of him and sat back down across from him with her coffee. She had seen the phone light up. She had read his face the way she had been reading his face for years. "Where to next?" she said. He looked at her. "I don't have to." "Calder." She said it with the gentle finality of a woman who had raised him to go do hard things and was not about to start pretending otherwise now. "Go do what you do, baby." He ate. He washed his own plate and put it in the drying rack the way she had taught him. He picked up his keys. He stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at her sitting at her table in her yellow kitchen in her house that she had painted every room of herself. And he felt the full weight of that, the years of it, the stubborn dignity of it, the fact that it was still standing. He kissed her forehead. "Lock up behind me," he said. "I've been locking up behind myself since before you were born," she said. He walked out the front door and down the porch steps and got in the SUV. He drove slowly down Millbrook Avenue. The azaleas were still blooming pink and white in the morning light, the same as they had been the day he arrived. The oak tree on the corner. The cracked sidewalk in front of Mrs. Cole's house. Mrs. Cole was on her porch, not with her hand over her heart, the way she had stood watching the day Ryder tapped on his window. She was in her chair with a coffee cup in her hand, and the settled ease of a woman who had watched something come and go, and was at peace with how it ended. She raised her cup slightly as he passed. Calder lifted 2 fingers from the wheel. He turned off Millbrook Avenue and pointed the SUV toward the highway. The pine forests opened up on either side of the road, tall and green and indifferent, the way nature is always indifferent to human affairs. And the road stretched straight and long toward Atlanta. He drove. Some people spend their whole lives waiting for justice to arrive. Calder Thorne had learned a long time ago that sometimes justice needs a badge and the right man behind it. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.